in Eastern Europe, in Kosovo, in Bosnia. It's happened, it's taken place in many different areas of the world, and we sustain that the expiry of the assault weapons ban in the year 2004 coincided almost exactly with the beginning of the harshest period of violence we've ever seen. During my government, we have seized over 140,000 weapons in 4 years, and I think that the vast majority have been assault weapons, AK-47s, etc., and the vast majority of these weapons were sold in gun shops in the United States. So along the border of the U.S. and Mexico, there are approximately 8,000 weapons shops. If we do our accounts, that means that there are approximately 9 weapons stores for each Walmart that exists in the United States and Mexico. So a good deal of our discussion did touch upon this, but I recognize at the same time the administrative effort that's been undertaken, particularly by President Obama and his administration, so that the agencies for control of illegal actions curb this export of guns and weapons to Mexico. We've seen a much more active effort in this sense than in any other time in the past. I have a great deal of respect for the U.S. legislation, especially it's the Second Amendment, but I know that if we don't stop the traffic of weapons into Mexico, also if we don't have mechanisms to forbid the sale of weapons, such as we had in the 90s, or for registry of guns, at least for assault weapons, then we are never going to be able to stop the violence in Mexico or stop a future turning of those guns upon the U.S. So if I am against the traffic of weapons in Mexico, I'm against the traffic of weapons anywhere, be that within any circumstance. The government of Mexico will never be able to accept anything that has to do with opening this. So President Obama has been very clear on the position of his government. We understand that the work being done by the agencies to stop the criminals, but this cannot be an obstacle to the cooperation that we have to have amongst Mexico and the United States to stop these criminal activities that underlie this issue, and which is one of the greatest obstacles and problems for Mexico. I understand the internal problems from a political point of view in the United States, and I mentioned this publicly in Congress in the United States, and I said things exactly the way I believe them. I said them outright. There's a great deal of discrepancy between points of view. It's a very complex political issue, but it is very important to underscore it. And I believe that's the only part of the question that I can answer it, and I would say that what President Obama has already answered was very well done.
Well, just very briefly, with respect to the presidential elections in Mexico, Vice President Biden met with the candidates to express sentiments that are similar to the ones that Stephen just expressed here with respect to U.S. Elections, and that is that the friendship between our three countries, the partnership between our three countries, extends beyond and is more fundamental than any particular party or any particular election. And that's the message we have to send with respect to Mexico. I've had an excellent working relationship with Felipe. I expect to have an excellent working relationship with the next Mexican president, whoever that candidate may be, because the underlying common interests that we have economically, socially, culturally, the people-to-people relationship that we have is so important that it transcends partisan politics. And with respect to the issue of guns, I've made very clear in every meeting that I've had with Felipe, and we've actually put into practice efforts to stop illegal gun trafficking north to south. It is a difficult task, but it's one that we have taken very seriously and taken some unprecedented steps. We will continue to coordinate closely with the Mexican government because we recognize the toll that it's taken with respect to families and innocent individuals inside of Mexico. And this is part of our broader comprehensive cooperation in weakening the grip of narco-trafficking within Mexico. And we recognize that we have a responsibility to reduce demand for drugs, that we have a responsibility to make sure that not only guns but also bulk cash isn't flowing into Mexico. And obviously, President Calderon takes very seriously his responsibilities to apply effective law enforcement within Mexico. And I think he's taken courageous steps to do that. So we're going to keep on partnering together in order to continue to make progress on this very important issue.
You asked me about the visa requirement. Visa requirement is the really only effective means we have in Canada today to deal with large-scale bogus refugee claims under our refugee determination system. Legislation that is being implemented, and then as fact there's legislation before Parliament to enhance those changes. That legislation will, in the future, in years to come, will give us tools other than visa requirement to deal with that particular problem. But as of today, that remains the only tool at our disposal.
Okay. Finally, from
Mark Kennedy, Post Media News.
Hello, gentlemen. I have a couple of questions on two critical issues that you were discussing today, one on trade and one on crime. On trade, Prime Minister Harper, why is Canada's position at the negotiating table on the Trans-Pacific Partnership so important to Canada? And secondly, to get us there, to be a player, are you willing to give up as a precondition our supply management system? And President Obama, you said earlier that there needs to be high standards for a country to be there. I'm wondering whether you think yet Canada has met those high standards, whether you want us to drop our traditional supply management system. And on crime, we in Canada read about the challenges that Mexico has on the drug cartels and the horrible violence that occurs down there. But perhaps it's possible that many Canadians and perhaps even Americans don't see it as affecting their lives. Perhaps it doesn't affect their communities. So on that issue, why do you three gentlemen think that a three-country coordinated approach is necessary to protect our citizens? And Prime Minister, I think you being the only person that can speak both English and French, if you can do that, please.
Sure. First of all, in response to the question on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this is our desire to be part of that negotiation is part of Canada's ambitious trade agenda. As you know, we are currently in negotiations with over 50 countries around the world, including the European Union and Japan and India. So this was obviously a logical extension of our desire, the desire of our government to dramatically broaden our free trade relationships around the world. You know, Canada's position on Trans-Pacific Partnership is the same as our position in any trade negotiation. We expect to negotiate and debate all manner of issues, and we seek ambitious outcomes to free trade agreements. In those negotiations, of course, you know, Canada will attempt to promote and to defend Canada's interests, not just across the economy, but in individual sectors as well. On the question of security, look, the security problems are the security challenge, particularly around the drug trade, is a serious regional problem throughout our hemisphere that has real impacts, you know, not the kind of governance and security impacts we see maybe in Central America and the Caribbean and elsewhere, but has real serious impacts on the health and safety of communities in our country as well. And as these criminal networks are transnational, it's important that our attempts to fight them be equally transnational, and that's why we work together on these initiatives. Pour la question du partenariat transpacifique, le Canada cherche à se joindre à ces discussions à cause de notre programme ambitieux envers le libre-échange à travers le monde. Nous sommes nous sommes en discussion avec plus de 50 pays, y compris l'Union européenne, l'Inde, le Japon, et c'est une partie naturelle de notre ambition de diversifier nos liens de libre-échange. Pour des spécifiques des négociations, évidemment, ce sont des choses qu'on discute à la table. Nous croyons que nous pouvons atteindre les ambitions de ce partenariat. Nous avons examiné le document produit par ce partenariat et nous pouvons atteindre ces objectifs. Mais dans toutes les discussions, c'est naturel pour un pays de promouvoir pas seulement les intérêts de l'économie globale de notre pays, mais évidemment de nos secteurs aussi. Pour la question de sécurité dans l'hémisphère, des menaces de sécurité causées plus particulièrement par le commerce des drogues, est un problème qui touche à toutes nos communautés. Peut-être pas avec la même violence et les mêmes menaces à la gouvernance que dans d'autres pays de l'Amérique centrale, par exemple, mais ils sont des préoccupations sérieuses quand même. Et ces réseaux qui poursuivent de telles activités sont des réseaux transnationaux et c'est essentiel qu'on agisse d'une façon transnationale pour les combattre. Et c'est la raison pour laquelle nous participons dans de telles initiatives.
Yeah. Well, with respect to the TPP, as is true of any process of arriving at a trade agreement, every country that's participating is going to have to make some modifications. That's inherent in the process because each of our countries have their own idiosyncrasies, certain industries that have in the past been protected, certain practices that may be unique to that country but end up creating disadvantages for businesses from other countries. And so it's a process of everybody making adjustments. I don't think Canada would be unique in that. Are there areas where we'd like to see some changes in terms of Canadian practices? Of course. I assure you that Canada will have some complaints directed at us, and every member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership eventually would have to make some modifications in order to accommodate the larger interest of growing the overall economy and expanding trade and ultimately jobs. So I don't anticipate that there's something unique about Canada that wouldn't be true for any of the other aspirants to forming this Trans-Pacific Partnership. With respect to the transnational drug trade, first and foremost, I think we should be concerned about what's happening in Mexico and Central America because when you have innocent families and women and children who are being gunned down on the streets, that should be everybody's problem, not just our problem, not just their problem. There's a sense of neighborly regard and concern that has to be part of our calculus and our foreign policy. But more practically, the United States shares a border with Mexico. If you have this kind of violence and the power of the drug trade as a whole expanding in countries that are so closely affiliated with us, in Central American countries, if you start getting a larger and larger space in which they have control over serious chunks of the economy, if they're undermining institutions in these countries, that will impact our capacity to do business in these countries. It could have a spillover effect in terms of our nationals who are living in those countries, tourists that are visiting these countries. It can have a deteriorating effect overall on the nature of our relationship, and that's something that we have to pay attention to. And as I said, I think the Mexican government has taken this very seriously, at great cost to itself. We have an obligation to take it just as seriously, in part because